Hello and welcome to the Cattle Show. My name is Mike Jared with Cargill Animal Nutrition. Today we're going to focus the show specifically on calf management. This is a fun topic to talk about, and we're going to have a lot of good things to cover in this show today. Some of the key areas that we want to look at include the maternity pen area and the actual calving and management of that. We have to make sure that we get that calf off to a good start in the first couple of days. We're also going to spend some time talking about overall goals within the calf and heifer program and look a little bit at economics and some of the things that we can accomplish by really focusing in on management and making sure that we grow calves the way that we should on the farm. Today we're going to be joined by Rick Canfield. Rick is our dairy specialist in New York, so we're very excited to have him. He's very much so an expert on the calf and heifer area and will have plenty of great information for us. Let's get started. Hello, Rick.
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
How you doing? Doing good today.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself? Give us a little bit of background.
Well, I'm a dairy specialist here with Cargill, and so I support our marketing people in the field with technical information and if they run into problems, troubleshooting on farms. So I have a PhD in animal nutrition, and I just help with technical background as much as I can.
Rick, can you tell us just a little bit about some of the first steps we want to make sure that we take when a calf is born?
Well, Mike, the first thing when that calf hits the ground is that we like to have someone there to assist the birth. In case there is a problem, the calf isn't breathing. We want to then set it in a clean part of the pen where it won't get contaminated with potential manure from mom since she's been in the calving pen maybe for a few hours. And then we want to dip the navels. Critical step in calf health. It's a major area for bacteria to enter into the animal and to cause illness and possibly death. And then lastly, what we really want to accomplish is getting colostrum into the calves, because calves are born with a very naive immune system and they don't have any antibodies at birth. Colostrum is the first milk that the dam produces right after birth, and it's very, very rich in proteins, particularly in antibody. It's very critical that we get antibody into the calves because they really don't get any from their dam while they're in utero, till she develops immunity on her own, which doesn't happen until 4 to 6 weeks down the road. And the earlier we get it done, the more absorption of those precious antibodies we can actually accomplish.
Rick, one of the important things is to make sure that we have good quality colostrum going to the calf.
Well, first of all, we always look at it visually. We never want to use bloody, clotty colostrum that may have already lost some of its nutritive value. There's 3 good ways to evaluate its quality. One is to milk the cow and look at the actual volume of milk that we harvest from the cow. There's essentially a set amount of antibody that's produced by the cow. So if you dilute that in a small amount of milk, she'll have very high quality colostrum. Where if she dilutes that in a large amount of milk, you'll have more dilute concentration of the antibodies. And so a simple rule is called the 18 or 20 pound rule. If you milk the cow and she produces more than 18 or 20 pounds of milk, you may not want to use that colostrum if you have another option. Another technique is to use the colostrometer, which is a measure of specific gravity. And you put fresh colostrum in a graduated cylinder, put the colostrometer device in there, and essentially measures the buoyancy, the thickness of the colostrum. And it'll give you an indication of whether it's good or poor. And there's a relationship between the total solids in colostrum and antibody level. If we have milk colostrum that's quite thick and rich and has a high specific gravity, the colostrometer will pick that up and show us that we probably have pretty decent product. But what we're really interested in knowing is how much antibody is in this, because that's what we really are trying to deliver. And there's a new technique on the market, and it's actually an ELISA, so it's an enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. And it works a lot like a SNAP test, so I'm sure the dairy producers will be familiar with that. And essentially, it's a very quick test to run. You take 1 or 2 drops of mixed colostrum, put it in some material, put it in the SNAP test, in the cassette, and you can read them in about 15 minutes. And it has a cutoff of 50 milligrams per mil, and so if it meets that criteria, there's a very good chance that that's excellent quality colostrum, and if we get 2 to 4 quarts of that into a calf, we should have very good passive transfer.
Can you tell us just a little bit more about what our target should be to help ensure that we get good passive immunity into the calf?
Right. If we know that we have high quality colostrum that's above the 50 milligrams, for instance, we can get by with probably about 2 quarts. But oftentimes we don't know, or there's some question about it. And so we always want to err on the positive side, because we can make up with volume for some of that mass that we might be missing in massive antibody. So the recommendation has always been 2 to 4 quarts. Most calves will not drink 4 quarts of colostrum right off the bat, but you can typically get 2 to 3 quarts into a calf pretty easily. And the other point, Mike, beyond amounts is timing. We mentioned it earlier, but it is really the critical step. Even though we have a window where the small intestine of the calf can absorb these antibodies up to about 24 hours, it's not a linear relationship. And the ability to absorb those antibodies disappears rapidly, even in the first 6 hours. It's very much a curvilinear response. And so the earlier we can get that colostrum into the calf within that first 1 or 2 hours is really critical.
As we're out here with the calves, it's quite obvious that we have them separated, living in individual housing units here. Now that's actually done for some good management reasons with the calves.
This setup on this farm is just excellent. We have a well-drained sand pad which is easily cleaned as the calves move out from the maternity area. We house them individually in these hutches which are clean before the calf enters. All of this is just to reduce the prevalence of disease and the transmission of disease from one calf to another. Even on the best operations, we're going to have a sick calf once in a while. And if she has nose-to-nose contact with many other calves, it's much easier for her to spread that disease. Or if she can spread manure from one to another. So the separation that you see here is actually really nice in that these calves really can't contaminate each other at all. They have access to fresh air and sunshine. Their feed is contained within the hutch, so it's protected. So they have really a nice situation here.
You kind of mentioned a little bit about the feed being inside the hutch here. Obviously that helps in making sure that it stays dry and it's always available for the calves.
Right.
Can you talk just a little bit more about some of the key management factors in making sure that we feed these calves correctly at this young stage?
Right. Consistency is important throughout the dairy. We know that among milking cows, but it comes right back here to the babies as well. I mean, we like to keep the interval from feedings exactly the same. So this time of year, these calves are fed twice a day. However, in the winter, they're actually fed an additional feeding. We do get a pretty good winter here, and so we try to get more nutrients into the calves, and so they actually go to a third feeding and spread those feedings out a little bit more, but they're done at the same time every day. So the consistency aspect is really important. When the calves move out here, they try to transition them onto pails to drink out of a milk pail right away. It makes the labor a lot simpler, and it makes cleanup a lot simpler as well. And also, by recognizing that their feed is coming from a pail, they also are more curious about looking what's in the other pail, which is starter grain. And we want them to start eating starter grain as soon as we can, because that's what's going to lead us towards good rumen development. Obviously, calves can do well on whole milk. It's kind of what they were designed to be grown on, but most dairy producers want to sell as much of their saleable milk as they can. A lot of people use what we call waste milk on the farm, which is milk that's not saleable. That often gets pooled and then mixed together and fed to calves. There's some problems with doing that, one of which is that most farms don't pasteurize that milk. My big problem with waste milk is that it changes in quantity and quality from day to day to day. And we really, like we said before, we want consistency in these girls. They're babies, we want to keep their feed consistent day after day after day. So it sometimes seems like a pretty inexpensive way. I've got this milk, I'm going to throw it away anyway, but there is some downside to feeding that waste milk.
As we look at pasteurizing system, as you mentioned, there are more people looking at that now, and it's certainly being utilized out there. It's certainly a way to take some of the bacterial load out, make sure that we're feeding things that are going to be less likely to transmit something to the calf. With that, though, there can still be some challenges in managing that as well.
Yeah, Mike, a potential problem with pasteurization is that it is another piece of equipment that has to be maintained on the farm, and it's important that it be maintained properly, because if it's not cleaned and sanitized correctly, we can actually be giving the animals a huge load of bacteria, and we've seen that happen a few times. The other thing is the pasteurizer has to be operated correctly to make sure we're achieving enough temperature and the time exposure to get milk pasteurized so the bacteria in there is sufficiently killed off.
In addition to this, obviously milk replacer is another option.
Sure. To me, the biggest advantage of milk replacer is the consistency. It's going to be the same bag after bag after bag, and so the nutrient package that it delivers is going to be very consistent for the calf. Because of some of the work that's been carried out on some of the major universities, we've discovered that to hit the amino acid requirements of these cows, we really need to feed them more protein and maybe specifically supplement them with amino acids. We also need to make sure that we're getting a sufficient amount of volume of milk replacer into them so they get the energy that they need. Traditionally, dairymen have been skeptical about the quality of these non-milk proteins, and there have been some really poor ones on the market. But today you'll find that the majority of milk replacers are made out of all milk components, whey protein concentrate, those sort of things. Typically on milk replacer, we'll see gains of a half to a pound per day. So we get pretty decent growth. When we get those calves weaned and then they're on an all starter diet, we'll see growth of upwards of 2 pounds, maybe even a little over 2¼ pounds per calf per day on a dry diet. So if you put the cost per pound of gain together with it, you can really see that you can spend money on an expensive milk replacer, feed it for a short period of time, get them transitioned onto starter and get them going, and you actually have a very inexpensive but efficient model for growing lean growth. And that's what we really want in these calves, is we want them to grow tall, grow their frame, grow their bones, and not get fat.
Really what it comes down to is ultimately the amount that we're investing at this point in time is going to get us to the right size, etc., of a heifer that's going to be entering the milking herd around 2 years of age.
Right.
In addition to kind of the dry feed and the milk, it's also very important to make sure that we get water into the calves as well.
That's an excellent point. You can see from, if you look into these hutches, that there's 2 pails side by side. One is for their starter grain, one is for their milk, and when they finish drinking their milk, it's immediately washed out and they're offered free choice water. Even in the wintertime, when it's 20 below zero, they get fresh water at every feeding so that they have an opportunity to drink some water. Water is a critical nutrient for them, and we want them to learn that they can drink as much water as they want.
If we're not offering water, what are some of the negative things that can occur?
Well, we're certainly not going to get as much starter consumption. They're not going to be as tempted to eat a dry feed if they don't have some water to go with that. And also, that starter, as it enters their very small, almost primordial rumen, it needs water to help get the fermentation process going. So eating the dry feed without water is going to just slow down rumen development and slow down intake.
As we're dealing with these young calves, obviously we want them to be healthy all the way through, but every once in a while we run into some problems. We can run into scours, pneumonia, a few other things. Can you talk just a little bit about some of the management things that we can do to help maybe reduce some of the risk of those things, and maybe where we may run into them in different situations?
Sure. We have 2 basic causes of disease in calves. One is we didn't do a good enough job of getting colostrum into the calves and giving them antibody protection against the diseases that already exist on the farm. And the second would be related to how do we actually manage those calves once they hit the ground in the calving pen and then come out here to where they're going to grow for the first 4 to 8 weeks of life. So we can kind of look at these as 2 different things. If we look at colostrum quality first and colostrum management, we hit pretty hard on quality, timing, administration. But the things that we can do to increase the quality of that colostrum also include vaccinations of the dam. So we can actually immunize the dam against common calfhood bacteria and viruses. She will pass it on in her colostrum, and that is really the best protection that we can give that calf. Once she has that, and we bring her out here to the hutches, we give her a nice clean, dry environment. She can handle any weather that we throw at her, no matter how cold it is. So getting her that foundation of colostrum and antibody, and then giving her a good environment to live in with good nutrition and just keeping her dry is really the secret to reducing those disease incidents.
One other disease that we do want to be concerned with calves is really yonis. I guess it's not something that really shows up in the health of the calf at this age, but it has potential to be a big problem later on in life. And really transmission starts occurring right away at this young calf age.
Yeah, yonis is a pretty serious concern for our industry. We're finding that we have quite a few infected cows, and it is actually possible that they can transmit yonis in utero. For those that have probably a low level of contamination, they probably do not, so the calves are essentially clean when they hit the ground. We want to make sure that we give them colostrum from a cow that we also know is clean for this disease, and that'll help in an eradication program that the herd may have established or may want to think about establishing.
One of the next areas we want to talk about is really weaning of the calves. It's another critical part of management with the calves as well. Can you elaborate on maybe some of the key things that we need to think about when we're actually looking at weaning these calves?
The main criteria for weaning calves should be, are they eating enough starter? Even in early wean programs, we want to make sure that they're eating enough starter. So they should be eating 2 to 3, 4 pounds of dry starter a day in addition to their milk. At that point, they're really eating enough dry feed that they should be able to make it on dry feed alone. They won't like it for the first day or two, but they'll do fine. So in weaning, we also want to make sure that we have plenty of free choice water available so they can get a drink of water to go along with that dry starter feed that they're going to eat.
We've talked a little bit earlier about the different timing. I mean, sometimes it may be 3, 4 weeks if we're really pushing hard to early wean, all the way on out 6, 7, 8 weeks is not uncommon. Maybe what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of those?
Well, certainly from a cost standpoint, the quicker that we get them onto dry feed, we're going to have the cost of rate of gain is going to be cheaper. If we don't put any value on, say if we're using waste milk, we don't put any value on that and we have lots of it, we want to keep feeding it, then maybe a producer might not see that as a huge impetus to try to wean early. However, we will typically almost always get better gains once we get them weaned and onto dry starter feed.
One of the key elements in really having them be able to digest that well and really take off well after weaning is going to be that rumen development.
Well, what develops the rumen is the fermentation of feed in that very small rumen. It's the fermentation acids, the breakdown of digestible fiber and starch and sugar in the starter feed that actually produces volatile fatty acids like butyric acid primarily and propionic acid. And it's those VFAs that actually stimulate the rumen to expand and the little papillae, the absorptive surfaces, to increase in length. We have to get that going first or else that calf isn't going to be able to make it on just dry feed alone. But if we look at a calf that's been consuming starter for 2 to 3 weeks and is up to eating that 2, 3, 4 pounds a day, she will have had a pretty good jump start on that rumen and have it going, especially if we're providing her some water to make that a little easier. The rumen is very small in these calves. And so because all of the milk that they consume gets shunted past the rumen and right to the abomasum, the fourth compartment of the stomach. So the rumen is very small at this point, and there's very limited amount of space in there that they can carry on this critical fermentation. So if we try to fill that up with slowly digestible sources like hay or other forages, we're not going to nearly get the rate of rumen expansion that we would get if we give them highly fermentable carbohydrates that you're going to find in most good starter feeds.
So it's really a key element not to be feeding dry hay at this point in the calf's development.
Exactly.
It's actually going to hold back rumen development if we fill up the rumen with that type of fiber that's going to ferment.
And I think another thing we have to think about when we talk about weaning is the whole stress on the calf. It is a stressful time. She's been out here in the hutch now for 4 to 6, 8 weeks perhaps, and she's got used to her routine, and now we're going to change it drastically. We're not going to give her that milk that she loves so much. We need to think about how we're going to make these changes so that over time they happen and we don't do too many things at once. So around weaning time, we often will have a vaccination. We may have dehorning or tail docking. We're going to maybe think about going to the first group pen with maybe 5 to 10 calves in it. So we maybe even think about changing her feed. So we really want to think about doing one of those changes at a time.
One of the changes that can occur when we wean a calf is actually moving that calf from the calf starter that she's used to onto a little change in the nutrition program, typically what we would call a grower feed as well.
Well, again, just like the transition from a wet to a dry feed, when we go from this first dry feed to the next grower feed, we're talking about a change in formulation, typically lowering the protein a little bit, lowering the energy, and lowering the cost. And so we have to balance the economics of the program against what kind of gains we're expecting from the calf itself. But again, the most important thing is just not to make all those changes at once. So if we wean her, let her stand for 5 days with the same feed, same spot, then we group her, and then the change is the group. She still has the starter feed in front of her. Maybe we might even go to the next pen where we put her in a bigger group and keep some of that same feed, and maybe even at that point start to introduce a little bit of hay or other forage. Then we'll go onto the grower feed. So that may not occur, that transition to the grower feed may not occur depending on the heifer program until she's 3 months old.
With the starter program, there obviously can be many differences in that program, just like the milk replacer, where proteins can change and different sources of nutrients can change as well.
We offer a variety of starters, and again, it somewhat depends on the producer's goals. We offer 2 23% starter feeds. One is textured and one is a pellet. The difference is that some people really prefer the look of a textured feed with visible grain and molasses folded into it. It smells sweeter. They think it attracts the calf better. The problem is with textured feeds is that they tend to be higher in starch and sugar. And when that feed goes into the rumen, whatever isn't completely digested passes out to the small intestine, and those starch and sugar sources actually provide a great media for growing gram-negative bacteria that we may not want, like Salmonella and E. coli's. A pelleted starter actually gives you an advantage because you can put more digestible fiber, which still feeds that rumen and makes great volatile fatty acids to expand the rumen, yet what spills out of that rumen is not very good feed for bacteria in the small intestine. So what we have on this particular farm actually is a custom 23% calf starter that's based on our line feed, but has been adjusted a little bit by the local consultant to meet the exact needs of this dairy.
And one other key component too with a starter program, we're not really feeding any forage. Typically the calf requirements are going to be the same. Starter doesn't have to change a lot. Whereas when we get to a lactating cow, we very much need to look at the on-farm ingredients that are going to change and then adjust the products that we're dealing with there for that situation.
That's exactly right. The starter makes up almost the entire diet of the animal once she's weaned until we get her down to that group where we may introduce a little bit of forage. But even at that, the bulk of her nutrition is going to be coming from that starter grain. And so we want to design a grain that meets all of her nutritional requirements for minerals, vitamins, amino acids, energy, etc.
We've talked a lot about nutrition and the management that goes into the calves. At Cargill Animal Nutrition, when we start dealing with calf programs or any other program on the farm, certainly the nutrition is a very important part. But the very critical part of that is really what we're doing with the person that comes with that. The Cargill Dairy Focus Consultant is going to be the person that needs to work with the producer to understand all of the different issues that are going on, look at the different management factors that are happening, and really look for ways that we can improve those situations at the same time that we're providing the very good nutritional programs that we need to deliver to the farm as well. Rick, one of the main goals we have as we talk about calf development is really the whole heifer program. It really sets the stage for that. And there's a lot of challenges in the industry yet today, on average, where heifers are probably 26 to 28 months old before they actually are calved and become a milking cow. As we look at a farm like this, what kind of average do they have?
Well, this farm today is currently averaging about 23 months age of first calving. So they're well below the state average of around 27 months. So they've done a lot in their calf and heifer program to advance that. But beyond just getting a heifer to calve at that age, we want them to be big enough too. And they also have done a good job of achieving that with these heifers that are nearing calving. Over here, pretty close to 85 or 90% of mature body size, which is a good target. The three things go together: body condition score, body weight, and height. So if we have two of the three that we can visually appraise, then we know we've got a pretty good system to evaluate the heifers. And these girls are not over-conditioned, and they're achieving good heights, over 50 inches. So we're pretty happy with their heights and their size. And if we compare them to the size of the mature cows in the herd, they are achieving 85, 90% like we target.
As our consultants are working with dairy operators, obviously they need to spend a fair amount of time talking to them and understanding really what it is that the producers have for goals. What are they trying to accomplish? What kind of things do they want to do? What are some of the things that we might look for in a calf and heifer program with different producers?
Well, I think the majority of producers are still looking at overall profitability of their operation. And there are different ways to get there. But certainly when we put heifers through a program where we get adequate size and development, yet we get them to an age at first calving earlier, it's going to be a much more profitable program. Because remember, these girls don't give back any funds at all, right? It's just money sinking down a hole essentially when we're growing these heifers. And they don't give money back until they have that first calf and start putting money in the tank. And even then, it takes them quite a bit into their first, maybe second lactation before they pay off their heifer bill. So the earlier we get them there, as long as we get them there at the right size and stature, the more profitable that entire operation is going to be.
So really, as we look at it, if we can improve the age at first calving, maybe drop that 2 or 3 months from where it is today, we're really essentially speeding up those animals becoming a replacement.
Heifers actually become an income source for many farms in this part of the world. If they don't want to get any bigger, yet they're doing a good job raising their heifers and getting them to calve in early, they actually have extra heifers. And so that becomes a resource that they can sell off the farm. And there's lots of farms that are always looking to buy replacement heifers. And so it becomes a pretty good income stream as well.
Really then, what we're doing is we're really investing into the future of the herd. This really all boils down to is just making sure that the farm is successful in what they do. So how critical really is someone like the herdsman in a role here to make sure that we have success on the dairy?
Earlier we talked about how the nutrition that we deliver in a feed is not the only answer, that you have to have good management to go with it, and that goes all the way up through the line. And in an operation like this, where we're bringing in heifers at good size, at an early age, very healthy, very little loss, it really is a tribute to the herdsman and to his staff who are taking care of these guys and fostering them through this whole system. So they do an excellent job here, and they should be commended.
Well, it looks like we've run out of time for another cattle show. We're very glad that you could join us here today. My name is Mike Jared with Cargill Animal Nutrition, and I grew up actually on a dairy farm in south central Wisconsin. So really, I've been involved in the dairy industry my entire life. I get a chance to travel the world and really visit with dairy producers all over, and it's always very exciting to actually see how these producers are so passionate about the things they do, the way that they work with the animals, and really their passion that they have to deliver a high quality product. Once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us here on the Cattle Show.
If you have a product or service that you'd like to see featured on a future program, or if you have questions or comments, please contact us.